Já po dnešním soloku bych se mnohem raději podíval na video, který mi řekne, co můžu čekat od nové sezóny, než abych zapl oko. Mě vždycky se na Necritovi, že on tam prostě pustí. No jako tady jsou holící strojky, ale Necrit tam vždycky říká storky, který prostě každý víme, jakože třeba každý rok je nová sezóna. Takový ty vyplňkové informace, jako vidíme.
When 2025 came in with a storyline that directly continued what happened in Arcane, while also teasing that there would be a new story with the Darkin.
Kámo, to mě strašně baví, protože oni, tiktokeři, normálně fejkujou Arcane pokračování. Na TikToku jsou lidi, kteří sledovali jenom Arcane a nemají tušení, že LoLko má nějaký cinematiky a že prostě vydali se ty cinematiky k LoLku. A oni to tam nahrajou lidi a dropnou, že je to Arcane, jak kdyby třetí sezóna, protože tam vidíš jako tu samou animaci, že jo, akorát tam vidíš Leblanka Vladimíra, takže lidi si to hnedka asociujou. A prostě lidi gaslightujou, chudáky Arcane fanoušky do toho, že Arcane má pokračování.
Most people thought, who are the Darkin, what is this black goop, and why is
návod?
Mordekaiser
Nechci
here?
nebůstávat.
The answer to all of that was, of course, lore. So to avoid getting into the exact same confusing situation in 2026, since we already know the theme of what's gonna be happening there, you know what we can do. Let's cover the entire story of Demacia with all of its historical moments, so that when the 2026 cinematic comes in, no matter what happens in there, you'll be ready. And so
Takže nám řekne o tom, že Demacia je proti mágům, že se tam kryli za runových válek a že tam Silas vedl povstání.
now, without further ado, let's dive into some good old classic League
A já jsem úplně zapomněl, že si můžu dát titulky. No koukej. Automatický překlad.
Legends
Let's go.
lore. Which is brought to you by today's sponsor. It's a holiday miracle. Because this video is sponsored by Manscaped. Again.
No jako Necrite nevím, protože ty tady děláš reklamu na holící strojky, které se používají mimo jiné na vousy. A kurva nosíš neckbird. Já nevím, jestli jsem toho fanouškem. Ok, já to skipnu, to má reálně 3 minuty. 3minutová reklama na holící strojky.
During this video just in time for the holidays. And now let's go back to other dark universes. The story of Demacia technically begins about 9,000 years BN. That is before Noxus, because the foundation of Noxus is technically year 0 on the Runeterran calendar. Anyway,
Okay.
this is when Runeterra popped into existence
Noxus nějaký
after some
důležitý, ne?
Celestials fiddled with the world runes. At the same time, there was one nefarious Celestial, whose identity is hidden to us, who decided to scatter the world runes across the same planet the runes created. Yes, that is also technically one of the reasons why the planet of League of Legends is called Runeterra. The direct translation is Rune Earth. Anyway, after this happened, for the next thousands of years, the runes simply stayed hidden. After which we can fast forward about 7,000 years, which is where we get to 3 major events. First of all, the Darkin Wars happened. This is where all the lore that was relevant to 2025 comes in, because of Zahen. But long story short, the Shuriman Empire had demigods in their armies. These demigods went crazy after their emperor died and after they fought the Void, which is when they also learned how to use blood magic, and they all collectively turned into the Darkin. This then made them turn against each other and fight for leadership.
Vidíš, takhle to jde udělat celý. Nemusíme se 30 minut bavit o Demáci. Ale kurňa, třeba pro mě je teďka kritická informace, já jsem to ještě nevěděl, že o těch runách na té zemi. Že proto je to Runeterra. Pane bože.
But they also fought for just killing mortals, because
Jsem
at
asi
that time they
zaostali.
just despised life. The thing is, the Darkin were so powerful that they managed to ravage the entire world during their wars. Historically, these events are seen as moments where the world was thrown into chaos and destruction. I mean, there is even a Darkin so powerful it managed to kill a celestial god. And so the key point to remember here is that the Darkin ravaged the world. And as they tore the world apart, they helped mortals find the world runes a little bit later. But eventually the Celestials came down, they helped the mortals purge the Darkin, and all was well again. Until
A hlavně oni ty Darkinské války, how long were Darkin Wars? Oni trvali strašně dlouho. Jo, 550 let trvali. Byl na tom největší prdel, že my o tom prakticky nic nevíme, jenom to, že nějaký byli a to. A tohle je prakticky chvíle, kdy třeba takový Aatrox nafarmil 5 milionů kilů na lidech. Protože oni si dělali vlastní armády a furt se navzájem vraždili. A trvalo to kurva dlouho.
Till the second event happened about 1,500 years later, which is when the reign of the Iron Revenant happened. This is another big story that happened, but we only need to know one half of it. I mean, yeah, to be fair, I've talked about Mordekaiser on this channel way too many times. And so once again, once upon a time, there was a glorious warlord called Sanuzal, who believed in the gods of death. And he also believed that if he killed as many people as possible, the gods of death would allow him to dine with them in the glorious halls of bones.
Takže prostě
In
viking.
the afterlife. And so Sanuzal managed to conquer an entire continent to stack up the kill streak. But eventually, he died after getting backstabbed by LeBlanc. Yes, she is very old. And when he got into the afterlife, he learned that everything is a lie and there was nobody there, just an empty wasteland. At that point, he was so angry, he just decided to become the god of death himself. And once again, during his pillaging, he indirectly helped mortals find the world runes a little bit later. But eventually, Sanuzal was banished and everything was well again. Until the third event happened about 300 years later, which would be...
Nemáš chvíli klidu, ty brďo.
And so, another
Jak reálná
very long
historie.
story short, because this is a story that got an entire book. There was a king from a faraway kingdom that was also a powerful mage, who had a dying queen. He loved her so desperately that he would do anything to save her, and so he sent his advisors around the world to find a cure. In the end, Callista, one of the king's generals, found a cure on the distant Blessed Isles. It was rumored that these isles had the blessed waters that were able to cure anything. And so, still blinded by his love, the king took the dying queen, which was completely dead at that point. It was literally just a preserved corpse. He got to the Blessed Isles and there he was denied entry because the queen was dead and there was not much to cure anymore. And so the king forced his way in. He slaughtered the citizens of the Blessed Isles. He dipped his dead queen into the water, and through a combination of magic, holy water and soul-stealing sword, the entire island blew up and created the Shadow Isles. The key point here is that the Blessed Isles were once a home to the most powerful mages in the world. But the vaults of Helya also safeguarded a lot of powerful artifacts, which may or may not have contained some world runes. Or at the very least, they definitely had some locations showing where the world runes are. And now that it blew up and scattered around, it was public domain. And so after the destruction of the Blessed Isles, nothing was well again, because now you had the undead roaming around. Which finally brings us to the one event you need to remember.
Mě to přivádí k tomu, že Vigo je jenom parodie na Mordekaisera. Přišel později a je prostě slabší.
The Rune Wars. Essentially, after these three events happened, people started finding the world runes. Those who found them realized that these held incredible power. I mean, we are talking about power that was able to shape the world. And in Rise's story, we learned just how corrupting these runes really are. They functioned exactly like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings. The power was addictive, and it could break even the most powerful mage.
OK, a jestli fungovali stejně jak ten prsten, můžete mi někdo vysvětlit, co dělá kurva ten prsten? Protože z mýho pohledu jako někoho, kdo nečetl žádný Lord of the Rings knihy, tak prsten funguje jenom tak, že budeš neviditelný pro normální lidi a chargeou na tebe bubáci. Testy na to, co dělá, jestli to dělají Vortruny, tak bych je ani nehledal. Čemu je taková moc? Páni, moje lokace se pošle mým nepřátelům, paráda. Takovou sílu jsem vždycky chtěl.
And so naturally, any kingdom that had a mage in it that held one of these world runes became a nation that was capable of conquering the entire world. The issue is, there were many nations holding the world runes now. And so, the Cataclysmic Rune War started. During these events, every nation that had a world rune started launching magical nukes at everyone else around them, in hopes that they destroy everyone else before they get destroyed.
No, to právě nesedí na to, ne? To je prakticky parodie na reálný svět a atomovky, akorát to nesedí, protože by se navzájem akorát vyšachovali. Což ti tak jako funguje v reálném světě, takže jestli tam fungovalo obráceně, tak je otázka proč.
Which led to one crucial side effect. The citizens of all of these nations just wanted to be alive And so they started looking for a safe place to hide.
Yes, a pak přišli na tu lokaci, kde je Demacie, tam byly ty stromečky, které totálně pohlcovaly magii a založili tam Demacii, že jo?
And that one place was in the southwest
Už se chytám.
of Valoran. There, people learned that there was a strange forest. This forest was full of pale trees that had a strange ability to absorb magic. Also, they were terrifyingly big, making this place a perfect anti-magic hideout. Among the many people who found this place and traveled here, there was Orlon, the leader of a caravan who is known for having a massive hammer. And it was him who helped build the first permanent settlement in these woods. And of course now we know that they were building the foundation of Demacia, which at that time had the capital city of Zephyra. To make sure their newly found kingdom would be serving with maximum protection, the locals harvested the magic nullifying wood, they combined it with lime and ash, and they created a new material called petricite. Petricite was a stone-like material that inherited the magic nullifying ability, but it was easy to shape, kinda like chiseled stone. And so, they simply used petricite to build the city. That's why the vast majority of Demacia is so pale. Anything that's white is essentially absorbing magic. And so, throughout the Rune Wars, as magical terror engulfed the world, Demacia endured. Although these events did spark hatred towards magic in the hearts of Demacians, which is where another crucial event happens.
Na další
And
2000
for
let,
that,
no.
we quickly have to dive into Mount Targon, because that's where we will find Kilem and Mira. These were two Targonians who climbed Mount Targon, where Mira became the aspect of justice. But while she ascended, she found out that she was waiting two twin daughters. Those would become Gale and Morgana. And so while Kilem and his two daughters were happy to be alive, their mother, now being a celestial being, had to occasionally travel away for months as she battled evil around the world. The worst part is that these battles became bigger and bigger, and every time she returned, she felt slightly less human. In fact, later we learned that she turned into that. And so Kilem started fearing for his two daughters, and one night while their mother was gone, he took them across the Conqueror Sea to a kingdom that was now known as Demacia. There, these three managed to live out normal lives, relatively speaking, until the day a celestial blade fell from the sky, it split in two, and it landed in front of Gale and Morgana. This was their call to continue their mother's legacy. They didn't know if their mother died in battle or if she was simply passing down her duties. But regardless of what happened, Gale and Morgana were now the twin aspects of justice. After this, they learned about their celestial powers and they became the winged protectors of Demacia.
Kamaráde, on by tohleto mohl normálně jako marketing zavést na to, že to bude zase nový story za tím RPGčkem, protože na tohle podle mě potřebuje zareagovat Asmongold. To je zase něco, co jsem nevěděl, co strašně rozvíjí ten příběh. A já se normálně stydím, protože mi tady říká nové informace, kdybychom je znali, ale já jsem asi myslel spoustu videí, nebo nevím.
While Gale was almost like a zealot, blindly following their mother's teachings, Morgana always stayed closer to the human side. She was afraid that their celestial powers could give them the same holy frenzy of their mother. And so over the years, there was a gap between the sisters that kept getting wider. Morgana often decided to use her magic instead of their mother's sword, which Gale saw as Morgana suppressing their celestial duty. And so Gale started having some resentment towards her sister. And later things would get much worse during the battle for Zephyra. There, as Gale was fighting on the front lines, Morgana noticed there was an ambush happening on the city from the side, and so she left the battlefield to attend all the wounded. She was still doing good, but in Gale's eyes, she left the battlefield. Interestingly enough, you can also see Gale not approving Morgana in the Still Here cinematic. There, you can actually see Gale and Morgana protecting ancient Demacia, which we can assume is the city of Zephyra. And they were defending it from one infamous Darkin who managed to escape his imprisonment. Although, to be fair, the timing on that was never clarified. Thank you, retcons. And so technically it is possible that this scene is happening during the Rune Wars, which would mean that ancient Demacia would be founded a little bit earlier before Orlon came in, and Orlon would essentially build Demacia on top of the ruins of the ancient Demacia. I just wanted to clarify that, even though it doesn't really change the story. For now, just know that yes, Kael and Morgana fought a Darkin. And once again, there you could see how Kael didn't approve Morgana's ways. This is an important thing because it leads to the end of this chapter. You see, eventually, Kael started enforcing zealous laws upon Demacia. Simply said, if you didn't follow the celestial guidance, you would die. Of course, it didn't take long and some people...
Počkej, ale on neřekl to, ne? A nedostal Kaela třeba celý ten meč? Nedostal Kaela celý ten meč, protože Morgana už žádný meč nemá, že oni obě dostali půlku a teďka má prostě jenom Kaela meč. Ať mluví česky do piče. Já neironicky Necritovi rozumím míň, když mluví česky, než když mluví anglicky. Že on, když mluví česky, tak mluví nějak takhle, rozumíš, že tam jako slyší, že ten typek mluví prostě permanentně nějakým jiným jazykem. A vůbec mu není rozumět, mezi tím, co když mluví anglicky, tak aspoň mluví takovou tou českou angličtinou. Já vyloženě takhle slyším Necrita, takže mu rozumím úplný hovno, když mluví česky.
People rebelled against the tyranny. And this all ended with one final battle around High Silvermere. There, as Kael and her judicators hunted down the rebels, Morgana seeked out those who would admit their guilt and she would let them live. Which, technically speaking, was against Kael's law. Of course, Ronus, Kael's champion, noticed it and he...
Takže to máš jak kdyby spravedlnost jako trest a tohle je pokání, nebo jak se mu říká, náprava. Aha.
He wanted to imprison Morgana for it, which ended up with Morgana killing him. Kael saw what happened, she saw this as the ultimate betrayal, and she let all rage loose. She summoned a massive storm of blades that fell down from the sky to smite all the sinners. But in this holy chaos, as the city of Zephyra was crumbling, Kael also killed Kilem, their father. In that moment, Kael and Morgana stopped fighting, and in complete silence, they left Demacia. Kael returned to the peaks of Mount Targon, seeking the guidance of their mother, and Morgana stayed hidden in the dark woods of Demacia. She was afraid that her celestial powers would simply hurt Demacia more, which is how Morgana faded into a legend and she became known as the Veiled Lady. Yes, this is technically the lore behind the new skin of the Demacian Battle Pass. But this is also why...
Počkej, jsem neviděl, kde se vzal.
Technically...
Ten nový Morgana skin, OK. A počkej, jak to dává smysl, teď? Na to, aby se schoula někde v lese, jako zůstala tam schovaná, tak se nepotřebuje měnit barvy, ne? Ještě upravovat křídla.
The lore behind the new skin of the Demacian Battle Pass.
But
But this is
Max
also why, if you pay attention to the Demacian design, there are so many wings. Some say it is all based on the Silver Wing Raptors, but for the most part it is all tied to the Demacian history with the aspect of justice. And although throughout the centuries Morgana became forgotten, history still remembered Kael as the soul-winged protector. And finally, that is what gets us into modern Demacia.
Počkej, oni si Kaelu pamatujou jako toho ochránce a ne jako tu štětku, která rozbila celé město, protože se naštvala na svoji ségru. OK.
You see, after enduring the Rune Wars and
Chudák
their magical nukes, and after enduring the celestial aspects throwing down holy nukes, the Demacians were simply done with magic. And that is where their heavy racism towards mages came from. But they also realized that their nation had a big flaw. While Petricite was really good at protecting them from magic, all the protective buildings would just stay there. They were really good at defense, but they couldn't bring the buildings with them, right? Right?
So?
Well, that's where the legendary sculptor Durand comes in. You see, Durand was tasked by the king to create a sculpture that could be brought onto the battlefields. The issue was that even if he created something big, it would still be a big chunk of Petricite. And so Durand did something special. Nobody really knows how he achieved this, but somehow, When Galio absorbs enough magic, which in his case, because he is so big, it is a lot of magic, he wakes up and he joins the battles on the distant battlefields. Although, to Demacians, the fact that Galio can wake up is just a myth. Almost nobody has ever seen him move. And that is because he is rarely deployed, but also should they get into a battle where there is enough magic to wake him up, the entire battle is a fever dream anyway. So if you told someone that Galio moved, nobody would believe you. Although, from all the hidden teases we know, that Galio's secret lies in Durand's special technique. In fact, whatever Durand did, it might be connected to demons. Because you can actually see Swain's demon on Galio's blueprints, and Swain even has a quote that confirms this.
His secret died with his sculptor.
The running theory is that Durand made
Okay.
some kind of a deal with a demon to make Galio come alive. Outside of that, no one has any idea what actually happened.
Zase nová
Hey,
informace
maybe
pro
it's
mě.
actually Durand's soul inside Galio. What we do know, however, is that Durand's special technique was passed down generations. Because these days there are more sculptors who create more petricite constructs that move. Although none of them ever became as self-aware as Galio.
To jsou prostě
Again,
stroje ti ostatní,
Galio
no.
is just special. Anyway, after this, with the use of petricite on the battlefields, Demacia got into its first battles with Noxus. With Noxus being an empire that was trying to conquer the world.
By the way, to jsem se koukal na druhém monitoru, protože ty můžeš furt najít jako tu mapu. Oni to mají furt online, tu mapu. Tady vidíš tu Demáci, jsou tu, ten prostor, o kterém mluví. A Noxus tam prostě ještě nešahá. Oni mají i tady v tom nejužším bodě, mají mezi sebou jak kdyby docela dost místa. Takže nevím, proč se tam jako perou. Jaká je motivace. Jinak Noxus je ty vole úplně všude. To je až trapný. Za chvíli bude celá mapa Noxus a kdybys měl MMORPGčko, tak proč bys hrál za něco jiného? To, že Piltover a Zone nejsou zabraný, je čistě jak kdyby z dobrosrdečnosti Noxu, protože nechápu, když se koukáš na Arcane, proč to prostě jak kdyby nezaberou ty dvě města, že jo? Jakož jsou slabí jak raní čaj. Dokonce tady má něco v Iony, jako velkou část Shurimy, ještě k tomu tu obyvatelnější část Shurimy. Prča. Všechno ostatní je proti tomu úplný hovno. Možná ten Freljord, že? A tady tohle to jsou, myslím, všechno jak kdyby nějaký svobodný země. Nukmirč. A ty si prostě Noxus vezme taky pro sebe, takže whatever příběh.
Again, though in their case they keep conquering because that's the only way they can survive. Anyway, in one of these early skirmishes, King Jarvan I got into a battle with a Noxian
Dobrý
general
vous, vole.
known as Sion. In their battle, King Jarvan killed Sion, but with his dying breath, Sion grabbed the king's throat and crushed it, with both of them dying that day. Years passed, after which Demacia got King Jarvan II, after which there was King Jarvan III, who of course had Prince Jarvan IV. Throughout all those
Originální
years,
jména.
Noxus stayed as the main rival of Demacia. Even the barbarian tribes from the north weren't as relentless. And so, during another skirmish, Prince Jarvan IV led an army into the Argent Mountains, where he made some really bad tactical decisions, and it all ended with his squad getting slaughtered and him running away into the woods. There, he got seriously injured with an arrow, but eventually he got saved by Shyvana.
Shyvana,
Now,
no.
it was confirmed that Shyvana is getting an ASU, so I'm just gonna hope her story is not gonna get rewritten.
OK, a je potvrzený, že Jarvan naložil Shyvanu? Že prostě viděl holku, která je na půl drak a řekl si, že to hitne?
So, another long story short. When Shyvana was still a dragon egg, she got stolen by a Piltovan mage, who tainted the egg with human essence, which is why Shyvana is now a half-dragon. Of course, her mother, Yiva, who is a real dragon, started looking for her. And as she did, she started burning all the mortals in her way. This means she also burned Shyvana's new adoptive father, which was the Piltovan mage. Shyvana didn't like that and she kept running away, until she found Jarvan. Together, the two ended up at Renwall, which is one of the castles near the Argent Mountains, where they stood their ground and they killed Shyvana's mother. After this, the two grew mutual appreciation.
Tak proto má Jarvan Dragon Slayer skin. O můj bože. On si udělal brnění z mamky Shyvany. Paráda.
For each other, and nothing more. And against the fact that Demacians hated magic, Jarvan made an exception for Shyvana, who of course was a magical being. And only Jarvan's closest guards ever trusted her. Which takes us to the final chapter, the current story, which is technically all the things that are happening right now after the story with Xinzhao and Zahen. And so, while Arcane was happening, Demacia was establishing the Law of Stone, which meant that all magic was prohibited in Demacia. And if you were a mage, you would be thrown into a prison where they would try to cure your magical affliction.
Počkej, tím pádem v tom aktuálním průběhu lolkarského příběhu se dostáváme teprve k tomu, že Silas bude mít revoluci. To jako je až po Arcaneu a možná to bude další. A ten další příběh by měl být to, ne? Seriálový příběh by měl být Noxus, ne Demacia, tak nevím.
Which usually meant drinking patricide and dying. This of course led into the foundation of the Mage Seekers, who were essentially a group of mage hunters who traveled around Demacia rooting out mages. And you could tell who was a mage seeker because they wear a half mask and they carry a grey mark, which is a piece of patricide that serves as a shield from magic. The funniest part here is that Demacia happens to be full of hypocrisy, that is both among the royals, because sure, it is illegal to be a mage, unless you are part of the royal family. If you're just born a mage, what are you gonna do? Well, if you are royal, you are just gonna hide it. One great example of that is Lux, who is a member of the Crown Guard family. She is a mage, but everyone pretends that she isn't. But on the other side, even the mage seekers are full of hypocrisy, because in secret, they use magic themselves to fight the other mages. They argue that it is a necessary evil to fight back other evil. But is it? And so while the story of 2025 was happening in Noxus, there were two things that happened in the background in Demacia. First of all, Cytherea, a beloved side character, arrived in the capital of Demacia. We will get back to her later. But also, a young boy named Silas was taken in by the Mage Seekers. Now, Silas had a special magical ability. He was able to see magic, and he was able to use any magic he touched. And so naturally, the Mage Seekers forced him into their order so that he could snitch out other mages. It didn't take long, and Silas couldn't control his magic copying ability, and he ended up killing a fellow Mage Seeker. So yes, he was thrown into a prison himself. There, he was imprisoned for many years until the boy turned into an adult, which is where the Lux comic happened.
Jo, OK, ale on to teďka říká, že se to tam dělalo na pozadí v Arcaneu, což by znamenalo, že třeba taková Mel je o mnoho starší než Silas. A zároveň to by třeba jako Lux ještě nebyla na světě, když probíhal Arcane. Já tomu nerozumím.
And here, all of you need to pay attention, because it is extremely likely that this is what the 2026 story will cover. Because the next part comes directly after the story with Zahen.
Po 23 minutách jsme tam dostali.
There are two storylines that meet here. First of all, Lux tries to learn how to control her own magic as well as hide it. So she stumbles into the Mage Seeker library, but she also finds the Mage Seeker prisons, and that is where she finds Silas. The two become friends because, of course, Lux knows that he is a mage and he can see that Lux is a mage. And so he teaches Lux how to control her magic, and in return, she brings Silas some books to read. Now, because these are Mage Seeker books, Silas learns about patricide. In the comic, we can directly see that he learns Galio's secret, but he also learns that patricide doesn't nullify magic, it absorbs it. Meaning that if Silas touches a piece of patricide, he gets access to all the stored magic. And eventually, Silas...
Takže Lux mu přinesla papír, z kterého se dozvěděl, že to, co je kolem něj, všechny stěny, všechno, je pro něj vlastně jenom baterka, kterou může použít. Páni, OK.
Uses this as his advantage to escape. Which is where this story is crossed with another. You see, right now, Swain is taking over Noxus. Which means that yes, there should be a moment where Swain gets to meet Mel. But on his mission to take over Noxus and make it safe and strong, he sends Katarina to Demacia to assassinate the king to make Demacia more likely to assimilate with Noxus. And against all odds, Katarina succeeded at her mission right as Silas escaped. In the Lux comic, you can see that Silas simply finds the king already dead. But in the Katarina comic, you can see her assassinate the king moments before this. This resulted in two events. Everyone now thinks that Silas killed the king, and at the same time, with his escape, Silas kickstarted the Mage Rebellion, where the mages of Demacia finally rose to fight back against the oppression of Demacia. Does that remind you of something? That's right, history repeats after the rebels fought against Kale. But more importantly, because Jarvan now thought that Silas killed his father, he was so angry that even after he learned that his father wanted to end the Mage Seekers and let the mages go free, he simply burned the letter with his last wish, and he kept fighting back against the mages. Which now gave rise to quite a few new side characters.
Wow.
Whom maybe could become the next champion in the new Demacian season, I don't know. But yes, soon after the Mage Rebellion was started, we got the Turmoil story. This story essentially functioned as an introduction to the rebellion. The reason why this story is so important is because it introduced Cytherea as a new side character. Here, she was a fresh soldier in the ranks of the Dauntless Vanguard, and she was tasked with a very important mission. Her squad would escort Arjen of Arbormark into the capital city. Now,
Okay, kdo to kurva
Arbormark
je?
was a neighbor of Demacia that was full of mages. And the reason why Arjen was brought into Demacia is because Demacia needed to consult a mage on how to deal with the mages. As a side note, Arjen is one of my favorite side characters. He's essentially a really wholesome, a really buffed dude who is also a mage who likes telling jokes. He's the guy who showed Cytherea that mages can be good guys.
Takovej
He's
Braum,
essentially
který
like
by
Braum,
mohl
but a
kouzlit.
mage. I love that guy.
Já to teďka řekl, vole! On to řekl, já to nemám pri oči, já jsem řekl úplně to samý, co on. Když to řekl, tak jsem si představil hnedka Brouma, on to řekne. Let's go.
But that mission finally leads us to the final part of the story, which is the Mage Seeker. That's right, if you'd like to experience the story that might happen in 2026, you can technically just play the Mage Seeker game. So, Silas travels into the wild woods of Demacia, where he starts the rebellion, with his main target being Lord Eldred. Lord Eldred is the leader of the Mage Seekers who married Lux's aunt. That is simply because the Crown Guard family wanted to make an exception for Lux, and that was the only way to do that. The side effect is that the Mage Seekers were now in power, because they were married to the royal family. Now on Silas's journey, he finds the ruins of the city of Zephyra. He finds Morgana, who kinda becomes his matron and a guide for the rebellion. And he gathers up a lot of interesting side characters. I mean, he even discovers how the Mage Seekers wanted to create a new patricide golem that may or may not be empowered by magic. And spoiler alert, the story ends with Silas actually breaching into Demacia, where he kills Lord Eldred, finally freeing Tiana from marrying a guy that she doesn't like, after which Silas leaves before the nobles have a chance to strike back. Which means that one day, Silas wants to come back for Jarvan, because Jarvan is the one who started all this fighting with pure hatred. What Silas doesn't know, however, is that after all of this happened, Jarvan realized that he was wrong, and his father was right all along. And so in the end, Jarvan disbanded the Mage Seekers, and he let all the mages roam free once again. Which is why sometimes you can see someone like Lux using her magic publicly and be fine. Either she's doing it around the villages on the side of Demacia where people are fine with it, or it is simply happening after the rebellion ended. Which also means that, yes, Silas technically won. But regardless, there is a really good chance that this story might be covered in 2026. And
Okay.
yes, it might also be tackled in the new 2026 cinematic. And so, just like that, you should now have the full context for the entirety of Demacia. There is also the fact that Demacia just happens to be covered in demons. For some reason, demons just really like those woods and the people there, which is why Demacians also have a lot of demon hunters. That is all related to the fact that the demon hunters also hunted magic creatures before. But yes, it was nice to once again cover some good old classic League of Legends lore, which makes me wish just one simple thing. I really hope Riot is not gonna retcon too much of this story, because that would be quite a video to remake.
Kámo, to je big. To všechno dávalo krásný smysl. Všechny cestové u Mordekaiserovi, až na to, že vůbec. Jenom mě jako zajímá, protože rauťáci mají vydávat ty nový seriály a všichni říkali, že to bez Noxu. Já se zeptám ChatGPT na to normálně. Riot Games plánují nové seriály, odkud by mohly být. Že proč to máš teďka jako tematicky do Demácie, když to pravděpodobně by měl být Noxus nebo něco takového. Arkane a jeho spin-offy. Tvůrci potvrdili, že pracují na dalších mých projektech, yes. Hraní. Runeterra, regiony jako Noxus, Demacie, Ionie. Hraný live action film se natáčí ve Vietnamu, takže by to měla být Ionie. A to je ono. OK. Tím pádem oni jako se nezabřednou jenom do jedné lokace, ale třeba do všech. Amerika v rámci LoLka měli už Noxijský event, my jsme měli Ionia event a teďka budeme mít Demasijský. To všechno dává perfektní smysl na to, aby Riot Games otevřeli obří multiverse, borci. Jakože fakt, jo? On tady mohl víc mluvit o tom, co se stalo s tím zájem, protože oni, myslím, retconnuli prakticky od celou demácijskou část, respektive to není nějak jako ospravedlnění, co se tam dělo. Každopádně ono to, myslím, mluví a jinde, že? Ono to má spoustu videí. Tady má videa na Zahýna, to bude asi ono, že jo? Typek chce vidět Silese, jak jde proti Fiddlesticksovi. OK, to bylo good.